Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk People with Disabilities. My name is George Ferrari and I serve as CEO of your community foundation. These half an hour visits with leaders in certain sectors of the mission-driven sector help us understand more about what's going on, how the recent pandemic has affected services and programs and support, and also how a renewed focus on racial justice can help us deliver even more equitable services. So this is a part of a series. We have archived videos from our previous Let's Talks, which we began in August of 2020. And that's on our website at cftompkins.org. Hope you can check those out and let you know that we're going to continue this program throughout 2021. Our next Let's Talk is on March 9th with Frank Kruppa, who is the Public Health Director and Mental Health Commissioner, talking about mental illness and mental health, mental wellness. But today we have with us Jan Lynch, who's the Executive Director of the Finger Lakes Independence Center. Jan will present some information for about 10 or 12 minutes or so, and then we enable questions through our chat box. And Nancy Masici, who is here with the Community Foundation, will be watching that. We'll end right at 12:30. This is not meant to be exhaustive or complete, but just a sort of a initial taste to learn what's going on and perhaps ways of thinking more about what might be happening in this area of our mission-driven sector. So Jan Lynch, thank you so much for being with us. I'll turn it over to you right now.
Okay, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's attending. It's great to see so many faces. I recognize some, but others I haven't seen. The Finger Lakes Independence Center has been around for quite a while, so most of you probably have an idea of the types of things we do. We do serve people with any type of disability, and it can be an acquired disability, a disability a person is born with, one that is because of a medical or accidental issue that or through aging. So it's really a wide range of people that we work with. But I thought I'd start out by talking a little bit about what we saw as the changes with COVID. When COVID came along, we stayed open throughout with just a few staff at first, and then eventually more coming back. We're still not up to full in-house numbers, but we do have full services available to anyone who's used to getting them. One of the things that came up for a lot of people, I think, not only in the general population, but also in the population of people with disabilities, is a feeling of isolation and a lack of ability to connect. And part of this also demonstrates that many people with disabilities are living at or near poverty level and don't have the equipment or the internet capability to connect remotely. We even have a few people that don't have phones. So it really highlights that divide of that you hear about for schools as well, that not everyone can benefit from remote services. However, we've tried, of course, to help people in finding ways to connect. Another issue that's come up is food insecurity. We received a small grant through our New York Connects contract, and we decided to use the majority of that to help people who are kind of living day to day in their food and with their amount of food. And we partnered with FoodNet Meals on Wheels and the Office for the Aging to identify people with disabilities who were most vulnerable, and then and may have particular food needs based on allergies or certain other reasons. And we did approximately for all these people a $50 box of foods that they wanted for them to have on hand, just as a fallback from the other types of assistance they were getting with food. So that's still going on. If you know someone who you think is relevant for that type of help, be sure to give us a call. But I think it was Amy who said she would put in the chat something about from one of our newsletters about isolation and loneliness and ways to combat it. We had put that in our newsletter because it was something we were hearing over and over again. I guess the other big topic is racial justice and how that intersects with people with disabilities. And it certainly does, just as it intersects with any other issue. I just wanted to read a recent piece that I found that said that during the pandemic, 20% of people with disabilities lost their jobs, but 35% of people with disabilities that were people of color lost their jobs. So we're talking about how that intersectionality of different pieces of a person's identity can really impact them having the same opportunities as other people. And I thought that just struck me so much that even in the world of disabilities, the people of color are at so much more of a disadvantage. And certainly people with disabilities are some of the lowest income people, and part of that ties to employment and the ability to become employed. And there's a lot of stigma and barriers to that. That's one of the things that we work on. We have a couple different employment programs here to try to help people become employed, people with disabilities. But yeah, I think that people of color with disabilities are facing really unique systemic challenges that we are trying to kind of get a handle on how we can best help. It's in our state contracts that we are to reach all ethnicities and people of color throughout our Tompkins County area. And for people who don't know, the independent living centers, there's 41 of them in New York State. So there's quite a few, to say the least. And of course, down in the city, they're much more, there's quite a large number, but it tends to be more multi-county or single county upstate. And we are a single county, Tompkins. So, trying to think what else I wanted to say about that. Yeah, some of the other difficulties we face right now is that our state contracts are at 20% withholds. You probably heard that from other people or other entities that all state contracts have this 20%. You're supposed to do the same amount of work, but you're going to get paid 20% less, in the hopes that as the financial situation levels out, they will pay back that 20% that they're withholding. Last we heard, there was a good possibility of that for independent living centers, but it is still very challenging to try to produce the same work and the same outcomes when you can't hire another person or take on another service area that you see a need for when you are cut with funding that way. Yeah, I'm trying to think about what else.
Jim, when we talked earlier, you were sharing with me the sort of the network of other entities with whom you collaborate, and that there are other folks that are providing services and information in the sector serving people with disabilities. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that Tompkins County is really fortunate to have, you're talking about Tompkins County, right?
Yes.
Yes, I think we're really fortunate to have a large array of very strong agencies that have different types of services for people with disabilities. There's Lakeview, used to be called Lakeview Mental Health, now it's called Lakeview Health. There's the Rocker Centers, Unity House, Racker's not called centers anymore, sorry. Racker, Unity House, and Challenge are all providers. I think what's just a little different about us is that we serve any disability, and it can be self-identified. We don't need medical information that proves you have a disability. Often that's required for certain types of services, unfortunately. And that kind of makes it difficult for certain people, particularly people with psychiatric disabilities who choose not to get treatment. We have a lot of people who come to us from that population.
Hmm.
But we do certainly partner with our other disability service providers. And one of the things we're facing as a disability issue is, and I'm sure you've heard this from Dan from Racker and possibly some other ones, is the wages for direct service workers that are not at all sustainable for people. We have what's called a consumer directed personal assistance program here at FLIC. It serves approximately 200 people in their homes to try to help them stay in their homes, and they can hire who they wish to help them with the activities of daily living that they need help with. And so in that regard, we see the same disparity in wages that, you can go to McDonald's. I'm sure everybody's heard this a million times. You can go to McDonald's and make more than you can taking care of a person, which is, pretty complex and a big responsibility. And yet the wages just don't match that level. So that's something that is one of our big advocacy points this year, along with, and it kind of ties into the whole thing with nursing homes, that the Independent Living Network has always seen nursing homes as problematic, but I think COVID really has highlighted how problematic they can be. And so there's a big initiative being put forth by the Independent Living Network for people to understand that rather than just putting a lot more money into nursing homes, we might want to put some money into nursing homes to make them a better place, but also put some money into other alternatives to being living in a nursing home, such as the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, or assistance for people who aren't on Medicaid yet
Hmm.
but want to stay in their home. Because, I mean, truthfully, almost everyone wants to stay in their home as long as they possibly can. And I think that's a great goal. It also diminishes their chances of things like COVID spreading through a nursing home. And it used to be even just the regular flu would
Hmm.
have deadly consequences. So that's another big talking point this year for independent living
And
centers too.
typically, I'm sorry to interrupt,
That's
typically you
okay.
get better outcomes and it's less expensive. So there's a whole lot of
Yes.
reasons to encourage that sort of approach. I want to encourage people, if you have a question, you can place it in the chat box, and Nancy Masichian, our Chief Development Officer at Community Foundation, will be monitoring those. But I had a question for you, Janice, as others are thinking about questions you might want to ask. Can you talk about the equitable access to both testing and vaccination for COVID for people with disabilities? What are issues there, if any?
I believe there are issues there. We've had people that can't access the site. Now it's called fully accessible, and it is in many ways. But when you talk about people who are really unable to safely leave their house, that's a problem. And we've started working on that with, I think Larry's on this, Larry Roberts. There's a kind of a small group of us that are trying to be proactive instead of waiting till the problems really reached a tipping point,
Hmm.
and talk about how do we serve people who cannot realistically or safely make it to the testing or the vaccination sites. And while it may be a small number, we can't forget those people. people. Many are have compromised health issues, and I know the current thinking through the health department is that if the aides that come in and help them, or the personal assistants or the family members all get their vaccinations, then that makes it a safer
Mhm.
safer atmosphere for those people. And that's true. But I do think that everyone deserves a shot if they want a shot, regardless of, who's taking care of them or how far they're going.
Mhm.
And so we want to really try to alleviate that one piece that we think hasn't been fully addressed yet.
Yeah.
Did you have anything about that, Larry, that has gone farther than what I just talked about?
No, but we continue to try to get a sense of how many people we're talking about. But I would agree with Jan that right now, and I assume this is not county specific, I assume that lots of counties are dealing with how to get people to and from vaccination sites who have barriers to that. I assume really that the best advice right now is for people who are providing direct care to people in their homes, get the vaccine, and also practice the standard things that that the health department recommends, like masking and trying to maintain social distancing. But I really think that we need to figure out how to bring both testing and vaccine to people who can't leave their homes. So if people have ideas or information to share about that, send it to Jan, because we're really, the more we know, the better we can come up with a plan.
Mhm.
Yes, and there's certainly people who live in some of the more rural communities that perhaps their disability alone isn't the problem, but it's combined with a lack of transportation, a lack of people to help them. There's been difficulties for people who are older and some people with disabilities to even sign up, because we all know the sign up right now is kind of tricky. But if you add things like a lack of experience with using a computer and sign up systems and all that, or a lack of dexterity to be able to do those things quickly, you again get a population that's being left behind. And while I trust that Frank Krupa is working hard, and part of it is just the lack of vaccine at this point, we would really like to plan ahead, and then it'll just go more smoothly and more easily for us and them if we know who these people are and how many there are and how best to fill that gap with getting them the help they need.
Hi, Jan. This is Nancy, and hello to everyone. I do have a question about that in particular. Do you know if pharmacies are willing to go into someone's home to administer the vaccine? Is there any of that kind of, I know you're trying to figure out the number, but
No, not that I know of. My understanding is that pharmacies are only vaccinating people who are 65 and up. And I don't think they're even doing people with comorbidities at this point. So yeah, that's not an option at this point. Maybe that's one we can work on, and that's a good idea to look into that as well.
an additional piece to that, someone is asking if they have their medical care already, how could that be incorporated into that process?
Yes, yes. When the personal assistants that we have here at FLIC were eligible to get shots, I thought that they might at the same time say the people they work with could be eligible to work within their homes. And that doesn't mean everyone could come, but made a lot of sense to me that at the same time the personal assistant is coming if they brought the person they're working with when it's possible. But that wasn't the way they structured it, and I'm sure they had good reason for that. But there are kind of some glitches there that aren't working well. And just so you know, personal assistants do not have to be have any sort of medical certification. The point is that that's kind of the point of the program, is that it can be your mother or your niece or your nephew that is helping you and getting paid for doing it. But they don't have to have, they only need to have the ability to be trained by you to do whatever it is you need done in your home. So while that's a good idea, to think about who's there for medical, that would probably apply to some of the services in our community that do have medical personnel coming to the home.
Jan, I had heard, and maybe other people know more about this than I do, but perhaps you could share with us. I'm looking out my window and seeing the snow and knowing we're in February, and there's a new opportunity. I think the city is set up for snow angels, for lack of a better term, or there's an ability to ask for volunteers to help clear sidewalks and pathways. Are you familiar with that new approach by the city?
I heard about it I saw it on Facebook, but
Okay.
I wasn't sure what the full parameters, at this point, I'm not sure of the full parameters of
Yeah.
that. If it's just fully volunteer or if they're actually recruiting people that will have some sort of pay or what.
I think it is fully volunteer. And, you started your conversation with us about talking about the difficulties of isolation. And certainly when someone already got good, Nancy already put that in there for us. Thank you. Ithaca Snow Angels, City of Ithaca. So
Oh,
you can
nice.
click on that link. And just when someone might, under different weather conditions might feel safer about walking outside, but see something slippery and says, I'm not going to risk it, I'm not going to go out. Some of the changes like this can often offer the opportunity for people to be able to feel a little bit less isolated, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a great thought, because we all know that Meals on Wheels, even though it's meant to deliver food, provides an opportunity for check-ins and for short conversations and to build some relationships with the people that they're delivering food to. And much the same, you're suggesting the snow angels could help fill some of that gap and identify if there's some unmet needs. And I think that's really a great idea. And it's amazing how our community has come together to do so many things to help so many people during COVID. I'm really, really impressed and thankful that I live in such a generous community.
Well, thank you for what you're doing at FLIC as well. Nancy, do we have other comments or questions?
Yeah, there's a question about the capacity. If FLIC was able to create a vaccination access plan for each person.
If there's a capacity for us to try to do that.
Yeah.
I guess we would first have to identify how many people are potentially in the group that are having problems getting their vaccinations. And that's what we're trying to get a handle on, that number in this small task force right now. We would certainly try to do that. We serve about 2,000 people a year, even though we're a very small agency with only 10 employees. We're able to reach a pretty broad scope of individuals. So that is a possibility, and that's a great idea to try to work on that.
I'm reading something about service training dogs. I'm trying to understand the question, so I'll just read it. Are there any initiatives to get those people practicing out in the world in ways that are safe? This is majorly affecting all dog training for companion dogs. Do you know anything about those service dogs in training? And
I can clarify this question because it sounds like you might not be so familiar with which is fine.
Thank you.
So, people with disability under the ADA definition can be eligible to have a dog trained to do tasks that mitigate the disability. And one of the things that's kind of a perhaps not as conscious on everybody's awareness, but certainly for people with service dogs or service dogs in training, is that to the extent that many humans are staying home, many service dogs are staying home. And whether that is a dog who has completed a certain level of training or whether they're still really in early training, literally not getting out and about in the world is limiting those dogs' ability not only to train from the get-go, but to keep their skills up. And so I'm just curious, specifically in our local sphere and with the Finger Lakes Independence Center, being one of the community resources around disability. Yeah, it's just been something that I've been aware of, both personally as well as with the folks that I help, that this is a less known impact that the pandemic conditions are having.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I honestly can't say that I've addressed any questions about that. I would have to speak to the staff in general to see if they're getting some questions about training and continuing to socialize dogs. But I got a puppy during the pandemic, and I know I don't know exactly what you mean, but I know that he's not well socialized at all because I can't go any place with him where there's people. So that's a really valid concern. And perhaps in our next newsletter, we can put something in. If you have anything specific you want to say, we welcome guest columns. But if you don't, we can still put a blurb in there to ask people, are you having, issues with this, and how have you solved them? Or are you looking for more help?
Great,
So
Jan, I'd love to be in touch with you guys about that for sure. I'm definitely somebody who wants to help others who require service dogs to have some advocacy and some extra support. So I appreciate that and would love to be in contact.
That's great. Please feel free.
Thank you. Jen, could you put your preferred contact information in the chat box just so people know the easiest, quickest way to connect with you? And that's exactly why we do these Let's Talks, these connections that probably would not have happened otherwise or would have taken a number of steps to happen. It's really important that we don't fall into the isolation ourselves as folks that are working in the mission-driven sector and are able to ask these questions and have information about that as well. That's very, very useful and very helpful. We're beginning to wrap up. We're going to end at 12:30. Happy to receive from any of you at the Community Foundation information or suggestions for future Let's Talk topics and or speakers like Jan. Our next Let's Talk is March 9th with Frank Krupa, who is the Public Health Director for Tompkins County and the Commissioner of Mental Health. We'll be talking about mental health issues. He also happens to be a board member of the Community Foundation. So I want to thank you, Jan, for being part of this Let's Talk about people with disabilities. Again, it's just a taste, just a beginning of this kind of process. Encourage folks to contact the good folks at FLIC and Challenge and Racker and Unity House and Lakeview and all those, the network that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's always good to let people know what we're doing. We have a newsletter, we have a Facebook page, but there's other people out there that we feel like we missed. So I'm glad to have had this opportunity, and I thank all of you for attending. It's been great. If I haven't covered something that you have an interest in or a question about, feel free to contact me. My email is in the chat.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Thank all of you. We had 39 people on this Zoom. That's a great connection of people to spend half an hour with us. If there's other information that you'd like the Community Foundation to help you access, please let us know and enjoy the rest of your day. If you have a doggy, I hope you get outside and enjoy the snow. Thank you all.
Thank you, George, and everyone else.